Get ready to be inspired by the great things happening in rural education. The Rural Scoop will bring you new ideas and innovative solutions. We'll dive into education issues and we'll highlight what's working in your rural communities. You will hear from a variety of educators, administrators, professionals, and others who will provide relevant and engaging content in each episode. And now, serving up the scoop, here's your host, Dr. Melissa Sadorf.
Some people become rural advocates because they grew up rural, and others become rural advocates because they've worked close enough to the gaps to stop pretending that they're small. Today, I'm joined by Hayley Spira-Bauer, an educator and education leader who has spent the last several years working with districts across the country to solve one of the most urgent problems in public education. And that's how to deliver consistent, high-quality learning when staffing shortages and service gaps keep widening. Hayley serves as a senior leader at FullMind, and she's also the host of her own podcast, Learning Can't Wait, where she's been elevating leaders who are rebuilding systems in real time. What makes this conversation especially relevant for rural communities is that while Hayley isn't from rural, her work supporting rural districts with special education and staffing has made her a clear ally and advocate, because she's seen what happens when the nearest provider is an hour away, or when the applicant pool is a puddle, or when leaders have to meet legal and moral obligations for kids. So today we're going to talk about the rural realities that she's seen up close, what good looks like when special education services are delivered virtually, what districts should be demanding from their partners, and how leaders can protect culture and belonging even when staffing is thin. So let's get to it. Hayley, welcome. Thank you for being here with me.
I am so honored and thrilled to be joining you on the Rural Scoop. Dr. Sadorf, thank you so much for having me.
Well, it's been a while since we first started having this conversation about wanting to highlight each other's work through our podcast. So I'm glad that you're finally able to sit down and have a conversation with me. So I want to get right to it.
Please.
You have been in education classroom and then have morphed into the work that you do now. And so I'd like to have you start by talking about what does your career look like from the time that you first stepped into your classroom and ended up now where you are with FullMind.
You know, I will make sure I angle this so that it helps to tell the story that you told beautifully in my introduction, which is that I grew up in suburban America. And I went to college in a city in Philadelphia and taught in schools as an undergraduate supporting teachers in West Philadelphia, and then did Teach for America. So an alternatively certified educator who was placed in the heart of the South Bronx in New York City at PS 55 under the leadership of Luis Torres. So nothing rural in my background. I had no knowledge or understanding of the Venn diagram that is education between rural, urban, suburban at that time. And I spent the entire time of my school-based career in the South Bronx or Harlem in New York City and had a really unique understanding of the challenges that were particular to that environment, but also the incredible access within a large city like New York, the largest education system in the entire country, what was afforded and available to students and what wasn't. And when I transitioned from being the school leader, school founder, teacher to FullMind, which was then called iTutor.com, which is virtual education, I was gobsmacked at the diversity of experience that occurs in schools across the country. And because of the place that I sit at FullMind, looking and supporting and working collaboratively with hundreds of schools across the United States, I had the most unique perspective to see what was really happening in all types of schools, urban, suburban, and rural, and what was rural America. So I quickly, as you said, became fascinated and enamored by the ingenuity and the just incredible landscape of what was happening in rural America. And I realized that the real beauty of rural America was not just landscape. But reality, it was the human scale of belonging. And that realization led me to focus my podcast deeply on rural schools. I would say at this point, 1 in every 5-6 episodes includes a talented rural leader. And then also just to deepen how partnership looks in my professional seat at FullMind with our rural partners who often have less access, less funding, less belief from the rest of the world in their capacity. And so the career arc that I really feel proud of today is having grown up and led a career that has nothing to do with rural America, but now fosters so much possibility in the most beautiful parts of our country.
Hayley, was there a moment when you realized as you were working at FullMind that access gaps that you were seeing in rural just were not structural? They were structural. They weren't episodic. They weren't one-offs. Was there a moment that you realized it's a deeper issue?
Absolutely. So FullMind won a Gear Up grant in the lower Kusquequin Valley of Alaska. And it was beautiful. What started as a partnership with a couple hundred kids, doubled, then tripled in size over 3 years. We were able to see the story arc of students getting high dosage tutoring before it was a trendy term or a trendy implementation, with real dramatic academic impact and gains. Now, what really opened my eyes was, one, this very rural village that is only accessible through unique forms of transportation that are not airplane, car, train, but rather dog-pulled sled and helicopter and seaplane.
Wow.
This community had access to one-to-one devices for every student, which was really cool, through a grant that they had received. And yet, the school in this community is the community hub. So the school would close down for funerals in the town. School just would not occur that day, and students did not have electricity in their homes for the most part. And so we could not deliver services on those days in the traditional sense using virtual instruction. We did have contingency planning. We had planned out for these asynchronous days because, significant weather interrupted instruction, funerals interrupted instruction, anything community oriented that was rightfully prioritized by the village leaders, interrupted typical instruction as most of the rest of the country knows it. And so this awakening began, it was probably 7.5 years ago, right at the beginning of my tenure at FullMind, to see that different didn't mean worse. And it required ingenuity to ensure continuity of instruction, which is necessary and important despite traditions that were upheld in the village. And it was something that we did explicit cultural competency training on, both for our FullMind team members that were full-time, as well as the educators on the assignment, because that was important so that we didn't bring our biases and our preconceived notion about what right and good looked like into a community that was thriving in its, very unique way. So that was my awakening moment, Melissa. It was right and real and beautiful and really helped me to open my mind about what's possible.
Yeah. So really changed what equity and access look like in a rural place for you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
What would you say is the most common assumption that people make about rural schools that you now know you need to push back on?
I would say that rural communities are often framed as lacking ambition, right? It's frowned upon in many ways to say, oh yeah, I grew up here. I went back to where I'm from. As if that means that a person doesn't dream big and see big things for themselves and their families.
Yeah.
What supersedes that for me is this insane, gorgeous commitment to people and place and future of sustaining that people and place. And also, I do think, and I think we said this on the podcast I recorded with you, that necessity is the parent of invention. And there is just incredible innovation and invention happening in rural America, which again, supersedes that like mindset that rural America is lacking ambition.
Yeah. Yeah. Can you give an example of that where you've seen a rural community really just outperform expectations because either that ingenuity or relationships or the support of the community around them?
Yeah, for sure. We have this partnership at Fullmind with the Rural School Innovation Zone in Texas, which is a collaborative of 5 different rural schools. It was created to provide access to the students in the towns to CTE programs. And so students are getting dual degrees in many cases while they're in high school, but they have to travel 1 to 3 hours a day to access welding courses, which are on one of the 5 sites, or the medical center, which is at one of the 5 sites. And depending on their interest, they spend time on a bus every day in order to go to the CTE site that helps them further their career ambitions. And that is so cool because that doesn't exist in the town I grew up in, which is, or my kids are being raised in, which is a top 500 school in America. Really beautiful community, very diverse. And yet they don't have access to that type of CTE programming. And honestly, what a gift for kids to be able to, even if they pursue higher education, also have a CTE degree and be able to make money as a welder right away, have a backup plan. In the age of AI, hands-on professions are really important. So that is amazing. And even cooler, the founder of the original executive director founder, Michael Gonzalez of Rural School Innovation Zone, found out about Fullmind and then had an idea. These kids are sitting on buses for extended amounts of time every day. Can Fullmind provide classes with state certified teachers? And we did. And so our partnership included this innovative idea that came from rural America, this man who dreams big for his kids. And students are in Spanish credits, math credits. They're going to be able to graduate on time, if not early, because of necessity being the parent of invention. And I just think that is the best example. There are so many examples, but the best example of how greatness comes from rural America.
That's a good one. So, Hayley, when you look at rural special education specifically, what are you seeing as the most consistent gaps that rural districts face that their urban or suburban counterparts don't?
Yeah, and I'm going to say this carefully because it can be misconstrued out of context, but talent. So in our country, there is a surplus of teachers, full stop. However, talent is not evenly distributed. So there may be enough special education teachers or enough math teachers or enough science teachers in America. However, they're not evenly distributed to communities that have been systemically oppressed, historically marginalized. And very often that includes rural, just lacking the draw, as it's described to me, for teachers to come to rural America. They're often drawn to cities or coastlines, and very infrequently do we find just a surplus of special education teachers in rural America. So students are, not because of the ingenuity and creativity and talent of the human resource departments in these communities, but because people aren't applying to teach in rural Arizona or applying to teach in rural South Carolina. Very often students' IEPs are not necessarily being fulfilled by the mandate that's required. Students are not receiving enrichment above and beyond what they need, but it is very, very difficult for school leaders to find the talent willing to relocate their families. And so, I have learned this because of Fullmind and because we've been able to provide that access and equity to communities all over the U.S. And yet we're not everywhere. And so this is still very much a challenge for school districts to support their most vulnerable learners in their education from K to 12 because of this talent distribution issue.
When you mentioned that some things just don't get done well or don't get done at all. When you have those gaps, especially around staffing, which are the students, as you're on the ground and assisting different districts, which are the students that usually get hit first when those services are thin?
Very often, it's the students that have IEPs and 504s that need pull-out services, related services like speech-language pathologists, occupational therapists. They need resource room, as it's called in New York State, but basically small group instruction to help students work toward their individualized education plans and their particular goals. It's also often multilingual learners who may be struggling to access both language and information as they're new to the United States or still increasing their English language proficiency over time. Now, as a reminder, very often when we're talking about our students with IEPs and our multilingual learners, we're talking about kids who have obstacles in front of them who have to work triple as hard to achieve and be successful in everyday life. And often these are students who, with multilingual learners, already know another language. Like, how awesome is that? Most of America is not necessarily learning two languages in school, in elementary school or middle school. So cool that we have these children who see the world differently and think about the world differently. Even our, students with special needs and our students that are diverse learners, they are often contending with all types of information and inputs into their daily lives. And anyone who has a disability, and I'm raising my hand here, can tell you, I have to sometimes work twice as hard with my disability to stay focused in a conversation, to retain information. My working memory is terrible. So it's these students who are so incredible and often hit the hardest, as you say, when we have talent distribution issues that I'm seeing that are really impacted by these regional and geographic shortages.
When virtual special education, though, is done right, Hayley, what does it actually look like for both the student and then also for the teacher week over week?
I'll give you a story because I think stories help to illustrate for you. There is an amazing district in Arizona where we have a virtual teacher providing the small group instruction and one-to-one homebound instruction for learners with disabilities. And a week ago, I get a frantic email from the director of special education. I'm looking at the schedule and it looks like the teacher's changed. I just got an email. The Full Mind teacher's changed. I just got an email from mom. This can't be. Like, the relationship that this student has formed with the Full Mind educator has been far beyond wildest expectations. She is showing up to school. She is participating in learning in a way that she hasn't before. Please fix this. And we did. It was immediately fixed. Like within an hour, we realized there was just like some scheduling conflict and it was remediated and the student is happily continuing on services. But let's start just on parent comfort and knowingness that their child is being cared for and loved, the student engaging and motivated in a way that they hadn't been before, and compliance. The school is now in compliance, but that's the bare minimum, right? Like that is the floor, right? That a student and family is happy and engaged with the learning that's being provided, that the school is in compliance with the state or federal regulations as required in their locality. Beyond that is also achievement, right? Students performing well on whatever metric is necessary to qualify a service like Full Mind. Students having opportunities and pathways before them they didn't have before. We have districts that because of the outcomes, because the students are performing as well, if not better than peers in district with a brick and mortar teacher, that are requesting teachers back year over year, requesting teachers on site to visit, to form deeper relationships in the community. We have students that are graduating on time that previously would not be able to continue on their pathway. And, the longer we delay graduation for a student, especially a student with disability, the bleaker outcomes are longitudinally. Yeah. So we really, these students deserve the very best teachers. And what I think is really special about virtual education and virtual special education is that in rural America, you're limited by how far someone's willing to drive to teach in that district. But, with virtual education, you can have a teacher living on the other side of the world who has 15 years in the classroom, 3 years of virtual experience, a master's degree, a doctorate in diverse learners. Like, you can have the best of the best. And doesn't every kid deserve that? I know that's what I'd want for my own children. And so therefore, it's what I want for every child, especially when a school is in crisis and can't find the incredible talent that they want to because of geographic limitations.
You're talking about quality, and then there's also fidelity. What are the non-negotiables when you're working with a school or with a teacher to ensure that both are in place?
Well, one, I say this to everyone, communication is paramount. Even in the walls of a brick and mortar school, if you have a school building where teachers are isolated, they're not convening very often, there's no water cooler moments in the teacher's lounge, you can tell. You can feel when there's friction. And then you can tell when a school principal walks down the hallway, greeting kids by name, teachers are waving through the window, there's dedicated time for collaboration planning, there's involvement from the community in the building. It feels different. There's warmth, there's joy. Communities are loud. I love a loud building. I always loved a loud building. And then when you talk about virtual education, the same is true. So number one is communication. There has to be dedicated time for the teacher and the in-classroom facilitator who is vital to the success of an implementation. There has to be dedicated time for the two of them. They need to be texting, emailing, calling one another, planning together, looking at data as a team. There needs to be collaboration between the teacher and the other members of the grade team, of the leadership team in the building. So communication is paramount. When communication lacks, implementation always falters. So from the virtual setting, that's really important. And, full mind, boots on the ground, people in classrooms looking at implementations, looking at how the relationship looks, sounds, and feels. So we do a lot of training and offer a lot of resources to communities and to full mind educators about how to foster that relationship. That's number one. Number two, we always have to have high expectations, both for the social and emotional well-being of students in classroom and for the academic. So when we hire talent at Full Mind, that is a non-negotiable. We are looking for teachers that believe every kid can achieve, right? That have those high expectations and also know how to facilitate it in a classroom. If you observe a Full Mind classroom, every class should start off with rapport building. That's not something that is unpopular today. But 9 years ago, when I came to Full Mind, principals would balk at me. What? You're going to waste instructional time with rapport building? Heck yes, we are. Because kids perform and buy in better when they see someone cares about them, when they have a relationship, when there's trust in the classroom. And so every Full Mind classroom, every instructional period is going to begin with that. And there's going to be, along the same vein, I mentioned high expectations, formative and summative assessment visible in every instructional environment. Because if you're a chef and you're cooking and you're not tasting the soup along the way, your soup's going to taste horrible come time to eat at the end of the time that you're done cooking and serving food to your guests. Same is true for education. So communication one, high expectations two, those two are paramount to being successful in this environment. And finally, the last thing that I would say, which is somewhat intangible and also prevalent and visible in everything we do, is care. This past weekend, one of our schools had a celebration for Teacher of the Year. The Teacher of the Year was not a Full Mind educator. And yet Our team member flew there. Our CEO flew there. They were there for the celebration. They joined the dinner table of the superintendent of the district. Like, they were present to be part of the community, because at the end of the day, this work doesn't work without care. It is too hard. It's not lucrative in the way that other professions are. So you have to be deeply committed to a community's mission and the goals they see for their students in the future. Otherwise, this doesn't work.
Yeah, good point. Hayley, what are some of the red flags that signal that a virtual model isn't working and isn't serving students as well as could be hoped?
Yeah, I'll give you an exact example. So during COVID, there was some funding released from the state in Texas called HB 4545. It was a bill that allowed for high dosage tutoring to be implemented. And there was a community that implemented Full Mind at the high school and the middle school level at scale, hundreds of students. And we used an assessment, a nationally normed third-party tool to measure success, in addition to other metrics like attendance and participation and, all the engagement statistics that we always are looking at. And we did this pre-test, got our data, worked with our educators to interpret the data and target instruction. And then come to middle assessment, so mid-year assessment, middle schoolers were thriving. Their attendance was high. They were performing well. We had really clear communication lines with the leaders of those sites because kids were taking it on site, not at home. And it was great. We were really proud of how the kids were doing, and the high schoolers weren't. They weren't staying on site after school. They were leaving because they had the autonomy to do so. The kids that were coming infrequently. Their academic performance, their growth was stagnant, if not growth at all. And we sat down with the leaders in that community and said, this is not working for your high schoolers. We're not here to waste your money. We have choices. Do you have ideas? Because we have some ideas, but what do you think? You know your community best. And they said, we'd love to hear what you have to say. And I think it was like much a collaboration. I don't think any one person deserves credit for this, but took all the funding that was being allocated to the high schoolers and reappropriated to the middle schoolers, added more kids. And the end of year results were profound. Statistically significant growth in the community, clear impact. Needed to revisit high schoolers, needed to think about that model more. It was clearly not working, and we had evidence because we have data to show it. And that is just not worthy of people's resources and time. When resources are so constrained, it's not worthy to waste resources like that.
Yeah, definitely. Especially when they're few and far between as it is.
Exactly.
Yeah. You mentioned compliance, and I'd like to talk a little bit about that, because rural leaders are often balancing legal compliance and ethical responsibility and the human reality on the ground. What does strong documentation and progress monitoring look like in a virtual support model for those that might not have an idea of how that could even be accomplished?
Honestly, it looks very similar to what it looks like in a school building. So if we're talking specifically about IEPs, virtual educators should be responsible for collecting data, progress monitoring, reporting, attending committee on special education meetings, taking ad hoc family meetings, school meetings when needed to support the growth of a student. That looks the same. I would say what you additionally sometimes can get is the ability to review instructional periods and code student behaviors when you're trying to create a BPA or a BIP plan, like a BIP for a student, behavior intervention plan. Looks like being able to distribute exit tickets virtually and get immediate feedback on student performance without having to manually grade sometimes. Incorporating a grade book that's built into a system allows you to really explicitly collect data on students. From a compliance standpoint, it should be a both and. You should be getting, if you're searching, if this is a school leader listening to this podcast, if you're searching for a partner to provide special education services for your students with IEPs or 504s, it should be everything you expect your persons on the ground to do and more in many cases. Because at the end of the day, if you're going to be spending the budget and deploying it to someone, quote unquote, outside your district, you need to feel 100% confident that you're getting the security, you're getting the minimum standard of compliance, as well as all the other things I've mentioned along the call so far to really robustly build out your special education program with out of school resources.
Can you talk a little bit about, because I would imagine that there's a tendency to almost treat the virtual teacher not as part of a team, but almost in a separate lane. So what should schools be doing or thinking about to ensure that those virtual providers are a part of the team?
Right. This is a great question. Again, I'll always start with a story. I'll start with two stories, actually. So, in many cases, Fullmind is providing a teacher when there's a gap in a staffing situation. So one of our virtual teachers made a 3D cardboard cutout of themselves and sent it to the classroom. And as part of the regular community celebrations in the classroom, kids go up and high five the cardboard cutout as a reward for different behaviors and expectations in the classroom. I think is so cute. Another really fun anecdote is, and I think this is something that leaders can and should ask for. Can the virtual provider visit on site? Is that an option? One thing that we do, which is why we call it hybrid staffing in many cases, is we offer that to schools when it's possible, when the educator's willing and able. Do you want them to come on site? And when they do, they're celebrities. They're like, kids are running down the hallway to give a high five, shake the hand of the teacher they haven't met. It really does help go a long way to build rapport. We actually did some research last year out of Vanderbilt with a dissertation that someone was writing on Fullmind about how does rapport and sense of belonging and safety increase with a teacher visiting on site. And there were statistically significant positive attributions for that. So that was really cool, which is, further validated why we're doing this and why we offer it to schools. But when that's not possible, or even when it is, you should also be expecting your provider, your vendor, to have regular virtual exchanges and virtual appearances to be on camera, live instruction with kiddos. You should be expecting that teacher to virtually attend staff meetings, parent-teacher conferences, family conferences. That goes a long way. Nowadays, it's not such a strange thing to open up a laptop and have somebody on a Zoom call.
Sure.
But, before COVID, we were doing that and holding schools to a high standard of having that expectation, because the only thing our teachers aren't doing, as Dr. Valerie Cave from Allendale, South Carolina said on a video we have of her talking about her partnership with Fullmind for special education and other classes, the only thing a Fullmind educator isn't doing is bus duty and lunch duty. Everything else, consider them a part of the community.
That's fantastic. I want to go back to something we've already touched on, but I think it deserves a little bit more time and attention, and that's staffing shortages, because they're everywhere. From what you've seen and the work that you've done across the country, what really are the issues that make rural shortages uniquely hard to solve?
Yeah, I think that we see in rural America so often, first of all, storytelling for rural America is challenging. I think this is one of the things we bonded about, right?
Yep.
Is that we need more people telling stories about what's happening in rural America. And so there's this assumption or mindset that living in rural America is not as appealing as living elsewhere. And so what is unique to rural America is, one, leaders, human resource leaders, superintendents, they have to overcome when they're trying to recruit talent to come to their community. They have to overcome that difficulty, that they have to tell the story in a beautiful way. They need to make sure that people understand, yes, you might not live 50 miles from a Walmart. And yet, here's what you are getting. When you go to the grocery store, your kiddos are going to run towards you in the produce aisle to give you a high five and say, Miss Spira-Bauer, you're going to get driving down the highway, seeing someone broken down on the side of the road, your cousins and neighbors and, the shopkeeper stopping to help and fix the tire. You're going to get the football game in town being the highlight of everybody's weekend. Friday Night Lights,
The thing.
is real.
Yep.
Not just in Texas, but in rural America, you get this beautiful sense of community that you're not going to see elsewhere. So first, I think leaders have to overcome the narrative that we talked about at the top of the call that many people have in order to recruit talent to relocate and come to the town or the community that they live in.
Yep.
Secondly, resources are constrained in rural America. It's a reality. Funding looks different many times. There isn't a Walmart within 50 miles. Amazon might not be prime one-day delivery. I ordered something this morning. My husband ordered something this morning for the house. It'll be here by 2 p.m. That's not necessarily going to happen in rural America.
Right.
So again, that mindset of doing more with less is part of how education looks in schools. It doesn't mean it's worse. It just means it requires an outside the box thinking, adaptability. You're looking for different traits when you recruit for rural teachers. Mm-hmm. And one of the other aha moments I had was I was recording an episode with Dr. Travis Anderson, which actually was another Gear Up grant. We landed a Gear Up grant in Montana, across the state of Montana. Beautiful partnership that has led to 8 years. We're still supporting schools in Montana as a result. And Dr. Travis Anderson came on my podcast and he was telling me about rural America. And he said, when I was the superintendent of my town and the boiler broke and it was frigid, freezing cold, no one could fix it for weeks at a time. So do you know what I did? I got my boiler certification.
Yep.
Because I had to help my community in those times, and canceling school is just not an option.
Right.
So again, adaptability is something that you have to screen for in rural America. And that's hard because not everybody's adaptable. That's a mindset. That's a quality. I want to work with adaptable people.
Yeah.
But can't always find them.
Yeah.
And then I'd say, thirdly, the other challenge that you have to overcome when you're staffing in rural America is you really need to find you have to find talent that is committed to that long term. Because what is worse than recruiting talent for a year, finding that talent, having kids be bought into that talent, is that talent leaving. So you have to recruit, and then there's that second thing. You have to retain talent in rural America, because the research is very clear and conclusive that turnover of talent is really damaging to students' longitudinal outcomes.
Yeah.
And so it is a long-term game, not just a short-term game to find people, but to retain them in the community for the long haul.
Yeah, very true. Let's dive into that sustainability piece, because one of the fears that I've heard expressed is that external support becomes a permanent crutch. So how do you think about capacity building so districts get stronger over time, and what does a healthy handoff plan look like if they're able to recruit and retain someone that can take over a special education classroom or a math classroom? What does that look like in terms of sustainability?
Yeah. Without making this an infomercial, one of the best pieces of feedback that I've ever heard about mine, our partners, is about our flexibility. Because at the end of the day, this is the kind of like phrasing we use sometimes, but maybe it's not as professional, but I'm going to say it anyway, because I think it illustrates a really good point. We know we're the backup date to the prom. We're okay being the backup date to the prom. Brick and mortar in-person teachers are the school's first option. So FullMind happily transitions off projects and implementations when an in-person teacher is found. What I'll say helps to really drive that point home, other than telling a story or two about where that's been really successful, is what I would say my actual goal for partnership with a vendor, and what I think should be every leader's goal for partnership with a vendor, is a relationship so strong that everybody understands what's best for kids. And contingency planning for the long term. I know a partnership is going well when they find an in-person teacher, remove the FullMind educator, and call us 3 weeks later because they want to build something else with FullMind. Not necessarily another teacher because they can't find the teacher, but they want to build a summer reading program that helps kids stay engaged in a motivated fashion with highly reinforcing content that they can do from home. Or they want to build an SAT prep program in the evenings at 9 p.m. for their student athletes who have no time to do it any other time. Or they want to build an alternative suspension program that reduces recidivism, focuses on restorative practices, and doesn't tax their teachers, forcing them to go to the dean's office or forcing them to spend more time at night helping kiddos in a way that totally burns out their staff. So for me, what it really looks like is thinking of your vendor as a creative partner. When the vendor has the capacity to be that, like I feel proud that we do, for solving challenges, not just giving you an answer to one pain point, but really being part of the ecosystem long term. And when they're not using FullMind for a year, that doesn't burn the relationship. I just got on stage at South by Southwest EDU with one of our partners who hasn't implemented FullMind in this year so far, but is still happy to talk about what it looks like when it's done right. Because at the end of the day, what rural America doesn't need is false relationships with outside vendors who are there just to make a dollar. That's not what education needs in general, but especially not rural America.
Yeah. Can you talk a little about what districts should insist on when they're working with a vendor, whether it's a particular agreement or something in the contract, really to help foster that relationship and protect students and staff and ensure that there is the possibility of a good handoff?
Ooh, I love this question. I do a little road show with a couple of my ed tech friends that has a panel of superintendents and ed tech leaders. And we talk about this a lot. Like, what has it looked like? Why? There's a really fun debate we have about pilots. Are pilots a good thing or not? I'll save that for another time. But what I will say first, it starts with, is the person listening to you when you're talking, or are they just trying to sell you something? Because it starts before the contract. And a really good partner or vendor is listening more than talking. And they're also telling you when their solution isn't right for you. Because that, I will tell you, I've seen it, leads to trust that then comes back later on when your solution is right for that community, if at all. So it starts before the contract, Melissa.
Yeah.
I would say, though, in the contract, to answer your specific question, one, there should be explicit mention of their security compliance levels. Are they FERPA, SOC 2, COPA, ISO? There's a whole lot of acronyms I could throw out here. And if a vendor isn't, one, talking about it in their meetings, and two, if you don't see reference to that in their contracts or on their website, you really need to reconsider, because I don't think your district wants to be on the front page of the news or the New York Times. And I don't think your families want student data exposed. So that's number one. Number two, I would say you should really look for clawback, cancellation, rollover clauses not everybody is able to say, yeah, sure, cancel whenever you want. In our example, as an example, we don't cancel immediately. We ask for, if we're going to cancel services, a 2-week grace period, because we treat our educators with respect and dignity. And if we're going to be taking away their source of income, we want them to have some transition time. We also want our educators to be able to transmit information about student performance, strengths, weaknesses over to the new educator. So we do require that for our cancellation. So really look into it and ask questions about why it is the way it is in the contract. If they don't have a good answer, and if it sounds like they're just trying to pad their pockets, you should probably run.
Yeah. Yeah.
Another thing I insist on, and I advise school districts to ask, who on your leadership team has been in a classroom, and when were they last in a classroom? So I can answer the first part. I taught, founded, and led schools. However, I haven't been a teacher or a school leader in a brick and mortar school in 9 years. So who has? How are you building your product? Who's advising? Do you have an advisory board? Are they actively involved in shaping the development? So since I have not been in a classroom in 9 years and I do not have an advisory board, I personally conduct all of our product interviews. Once a week, I make 3 slots available. I interview our current and past customers, and I ask them a ton of questions about their user experience, what they wish was different, what's not working for them. That is outside the relationship they have with our partner success managers, outside the relationship they may have with our customer support people. I, as the chief academic officer, am taking time out of my schedule to hear from leaders about their experience with our product. And I think there is no better time spent than me doing that every week.
Yeah. Talk about what you're hearing from superintendents as far as what are they telling you? What's hardest about leading right now, especially in rural communities? What are you hearing about fatigue or strain or any of the other things that are keeping them up at night?
Burnout is at an all-time high, both for teachers, but also a not often talked about topic for leaders. PJ Capozzi, who is a superintendent in Illinois, has been on the podcast a couple of times talking about the crisis that is looming for the superintendency. There are simply not enough people willing, for a variety of reasons, to become superintendents. And rural America, in the next 10 years, he predicts, and I agree with his rationale here, is about to be hit really hard. And schools need superintendents. Yeah. They need leaders to run the business of schools. I don't know that everybody knows this, but schools are businesses. They have $1 million budgets. They need the most talented, passionate people at the helm to help make it possible for principals and teachers to not burn out.
Yeah.
So I think that is very much on the mind of leaders in rural America right now. I'd say the other topic everybody's fascinated by is artificial intelligence. Where are we? Are we doing enough? Are we forward thinking enough? Actually, at NREA, at the forum this past year, I had the good fortune of inviting Matt Winters, the AI leader for the state of Utah, which is fully doing incredible things for leading the charge for connectivity in rural America. Matt Winters sat on a panel that I facilitated, and I felt so heartened hearing the great leadership and ideas and implementations that are happening across that state, but also fortunate that other people got to hear it too and get ideas and feel inspired and bring that back to their townships. I do think this runaway train of AI. I was at a dinner party this weekend. It's all people could talk about was AI. How scared they are, how excited they are, how scared they are, excited. Yeah. And no one's feeling it more than leaders who are contending with both needing to put together structural plans to ensure they're at the forefront, their kids are being prepared. And then on the flip side, playing defense because kids are kids. And with tools at their disposal, free tools at their disposal, both good and really bad things are happening right now. And so I'd say that that's another really big topic in the superintendency. And then obviously, top 3 problem always is staffing. I say this because, very often when vendors I know are trying to get into schools, they say to me, like, how do I get into a school? I'm like, well, solve a top 3 problem. That's how you get into a school, because superintendents don't have time to talk about the nice to haves, especially in rural America. Superintendents must be talking about the things that keep them up at night, which are their top 3 challenges. Yep. Leaders in rural America are particularly challenged by increases in costs to bring talent, teachers that are certified from overseas over to the United States. We are hearing that more and more and more. It is a time of uncertainty in education, and it's not helping that leadership looks to state, federal guidance, and it's rapidly changing right now. So I would say that, there's never been a perfect time to be an educator. It is a hard profession, and it is very challenging to assume the responsibility of principalship and district level leadership. But there's never been a more important time to have our best talent in those roles.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. So Hayley, I always end with the same question, and that is, what does the term rural advantage mean to you?
Rural advantage means to me that our rural communities are the best example of collaboration, community support, and investment in one another that there could possibly be. And there is, if you walk into any rural town in America, I can guarantee that adults are looking out for one another. Adults are looking out for the kids in the community. There is a level of commitment that is unparalleled. And that advantage is one that I can't say I have in the town that I'm living in right now, and that I wish I had, because it is so beautiful. And like I said at the top of the call, rural America is aesthetically pleasing, but there is so much more that comes from being in a rural community that I wish everyone knew.
Well said. Thank you for that. Well, and
of course,
thank you for this conversation. I appreciate you pointing out that rural places need partners who really understand context and honor the culture, and really are looking to deliver services that protect students and really strengthen systems over time. So I appreciate the way that you've used your platform, your podcast, and really your work to keep that bar high for rural America. So thank you.
Well, and back at you, I know you are rural through and through. And it is amazing to have leaders like you to look towards, to learn about rural America, because at the end of the day, this is a topic worth knowing about. And I feel grateful to have your example to follow.
Oh, well, thank you for that. See, mutual admiration society going on here for sure.
Absolutely.
Well, friends, if this episode gave you language or clarity or a next step, carry it into your next leadership conversation. This is one of those topics that gets better when we're honest about what's hard and what's serious about what kids deserve. So if you found value here, please like the episode, make sure you're subscribed to the Rural Scoop, and leave me a comment with your takeaway. Share this episode with a colleague who's navigating staffing and student support right now, especially in special education departments. Those actions really do help other rural leaders find the show. So I'm your host, Melissa Sadorf, and this is the Rural Scoop. And remember, when we lead together, we thrive together. I'll see you next time.
Thanks so much for tuning in to the Rural Scoop. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to rate, review, and subscribe. Your support helps us keep these important rural conversations going. And we'd love to hear from you, so feel free to leave a comment or share your thoughts. You can follow along and never miss a new release by subscribing on your favorite podcast platform or by following us on social. We're on YouTube at The Rural Scoop, Instagram at msadorf1, and X at msadorf03. The Rural Scoop is produced with support from Vela Educational Consultants. To learn more, visit velaconsultants.com.